ask, let's say, the average Sufi you're talking about, some of them they like to make comments about Syria, right? They like to talk about Syria
Oh,
and how
yeah.
they don't support the Mujahideen, and I don't support Assad, I also don't support the Mujahideen. It's like, what happened to you, akhi? Subhanallah. You think for your
Mm,
definition of tazkiyah is jumping up and down and making dhikr, or your definition of tazkiyah? Well, I'm serious. Like, is that tazkiyah for you? No, that's the trick of the shaitan. It shows you how all of these regimes, these super strong military regimes that are controlling the population and throwing everyone in jail and all this, they're actually much weaker than we think they are. Right? It's almost like the what is it called? The elephant. They train the elephant. They tie him to the chair, and when he's little, he can't. He doesn't know that he can move the chair. So even when the elephant grows up and becomes massive, they still tie him to a chair, and he thinks that he's sort of bound by those chains, whereas in reality he isn't. So I think that sort of summarizes the state of the Muslim world. Similarly, Prophet ﷺ said that if you do aina transactions, it's like a loophole for interest. You do aina transactions and you follow the tails of cattle and you're pleased with agriculture, talking about, you love this dunya and trade and agriculture and that kind of thing. وَتَرَكْتُمُ الْجِهَادِ, and you left jihad, then Allah will establish humiliation over you and He will not remove it until you return to your deen.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear brothers and sisters, to another episode on Ummah's Revival. I know we've been gone for a little bit. Everyone was busy with Ramadan, but we wanted to come back again with another strong episode. And inshallah, today we have an exciting topic covering the latest issues going on in the Ummah. And we have with us an exciting guest, for Dr. Jaan Islam will be joining us today. For those of you that don't know, Dr. Jaan Islam, he's done many different episodes on different channels. Many of you have seen him on Blogging Theology with Paul Williams. And a little background about him. So Dr. Jaan is a political theorist who specializes in decolonial theory and Islamic jurisprudence. And he's currently an assistant professor in political theory at Bozici University. He's got a PhD from Edinburgh University. He's done his postdoc at Oxford, and he's taught at King's College in London. And he's had a few publications on ummatics, if you guys have checked those out. And he's also recently authored a book, Islam and the State in Ibn Taymiyyah. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Jaan. How are you doing?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, jazakumullah khairan. Thank you for the invitation, brothers.
Alhamdulillah, we're really excited to have you here. And then with me today, we have Brother Muhammad co-hosting as well. And it was interesting, Muhammad was sharing that he's going to be taking Dr. Jaan's course in the upcoming semester, correct?
Yeah,
Inshallah, yeah.
Inshallah. So, inshallah, we've got a good group of brothers today. And as many of you guys have seen recently, the Ummah has started to erupt all across the world. And we saw over the past week huge protests, especially in Bangladesh. I think we saw about 4 million to 8 million people come together in Dhaka. We saw millions get together in Karachi, and then all across the Muslim world as well. And then we've seen a recent shift, and I think we can kind of all attest to this in the last 2 to 3 weeks with ulama, muftis kind of speaking up, taking a stronger stance now when it's coming towards the atrocities that have been committed in Gaza. And when I was reflecting on this personally, I was thinking that this feels something similar to the Arab Spring, or the Arab Spring about to erupt again. And the first original Arab Spring, I was quite young, so I didn't get to follow it, with as much detail, maybe as compared to Dr. Jaan Islam. But we wanted to kind of look at the original Arab Spring, reflect back on that, what went well, what didn't go well, what did we learn from it, and where is the Muslim Ummah today, and what does the Ummah need to be able to succeed? So inshallah, Dr. Jaan, the floor is yours. Feel free to jump in wherever you feel like.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the Arab Spring. I think what we can say firstly is it was a chain response or a reaction within a very specific historical and geopolitical context, and that is, started off, as we know, in Tunisia with one man basically who was fed up with the living and the corruption and the police brutality, and he set himself on fire. And when that sort of became, went viral and people saw it and they were understandably affected by it, that erupted into massive protests in Tunisia, resulting in the, overthrow of the, president who was in fact, a dictator for over 40 years. And this wasn't just contained to Tunisia, but when sort of obviously you had the same similar situation. You have military dictatorships over a large part of the Arab world, monarchies, etc. So when uh, the population, which of course is experiencing and is on the receiving end of all that oppression and the corruption, attempt to secularize and keep people away from Islam as well. They couldn't take it anymore, and it turned into this chain reaction where it went from Tunisia to Libya against Gaddafi, as you know, to Egypt against Hosni Mubarak. And these were all successful ones. To Syria against Bashar al-Assad, which really is, as we know, took much longer. To Yemen and a few other places, they tried to, didn't really work out. But the point is that it was a massive, popular reaction that I think remains very much in the imagination of the Arab world. And it tells us, most importantly, well, two things. Number one is the Arab Spring was a reaction to a very sad and what's it called? Really an unfortunate political reality where the entire population almost is being governed by people they did not consent to, they do not view as legitimate leaders, who do not represent their values, who, in addition to that, are oppressive. They're censored the population, extremely corrupt, stole lots of money, normalized ties with people who are at war against Muslims and against civilians. So, I mean, that's really what it is. For me, I think one of the most important lessons or the positive takeaways from the Arab Revolution is that we basically it shows you how all of these regimes, these super strong military regimes that are controlling the population and throwing everyone in jail and all this, they're actually much weaker than we think they are. Right? It's almost like the what is it called? The elephant. They train the elephant. They tie him to the chair, and when he's little, he can't. He doesn't know that he can move the chair. So even when the elephant grows up and becomes massive, they still tie him to a chair, and he thinks that he's sort of bound by those chains, whereas in reality he isn't. So I think that sort of summarizes the state of the Muslim world, at least from the Arab Spring. We can get that. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Muhammad, you want to jump in on anything? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was actually the last example hit me home, like the idea of the elephant being raised from, very young, kind of given this environment so that even when it grows up and it even has that power, it doesn't see itself as able to do that. And that's like kind of like the way I see it mirrored one to one with what we're seeing right now. Like this, like if you take Bangladesh as the example you brought up first, with like I think it was, like you said, like you said, 4 to 8 million, I think around 5 million that marched down to the capital. They that powerful of a scene, like that protest, it's a potential, and of course Muslim has more potential than that, but it's a potential that's always been there, and only recently have we been seeing this wave of Muslims marching down and visibly protesting and calling for military intervention for Gaza. So I think that example hits very home. It's a beautiful scene to see Muslims breaking away one shekel at a time to get back that power that we used to have.
Dr. John, I'm curious, when the Arab Spring was happening the first time around, um, where were you were you following it actively? What were you feeling at that time? Obviously, me and Muhammad were both very young at that time, so I'm curious about your live experience at that moment.
I was a student at that time, and I remember very clearly, when the revolutions were happening, when the protests were happening. It'd be like one day you'd go to the masjid, and the khatib, subhanAllah, goosebumps, the khatib, you'd be like, oh, there's massive protests and the Muslims are coming together and they're going to bring change. And then the next week it would be an announcement that the guy actually, let's say Hosni Mubarak, he resigned, and the Muslims are, and the country is free and they can rebuild from scratch. And this was again and again and again. It was constantly in the news. Everyone was always talking about it. And it was really, I mean, you had obviously debates as you always did, but uh, growing up in sort of that context, it gives you a lot of hope, as Brother Muhammad mentioned, regarding, in terms of what the potential of the Muslim is, of the Muslim Ummah is. The problem, or the sort of catch to this, brothers, is that we can support change, political change. We can applaud a population's ability to break free from oppression. But the question is, why are they breaking free from that oppression? What are they doing it for? What's their ultimate purpose? What we often see, again, unfortunately, if you look at the Ummah, again, not to say that that there's no good in the Ummah, or that the Arab Springs were not worth it, or anything like that. I don't engage in that kind of discourse, and that's not the kind of discourse I think a Muslim should engage in. But in looking at, in terms of, you look at the Arab Springs, you look at what happened afterwards, and you can realize, in hindsight, that maybe there were some ways that the revolutions were taken off track, in terms of not really adhering to the main track of why those revolutions are happening in the first place. And so what I'm trying to say is, it's very easy, as it happened in Bangladesh, to gather 10 million people, right, who are fed up with corruption and they want to change that. That's because it affects your immediate dunyawi reality, which is, you look at your pocket, you have no money, so you're like, okay, halas, let's go revolution. The problem is, are we willing to do that when our pockets are full? Are we willing to do that for a greater purpose beyond just what they call it, voting out of your pocket? Looking at your pocket, you realize, okay, there's nothing there, beyond your livelihood, beyond even your own your personal experience with police and corruption and that kind of thing. Is there a willingness to uh, in other words, you could say, once these revolutions happen, what are you going to do? And that's the question that we get caught. We don't realize what we're going to do, because we don't have that ultimate aim sort of ingrained in the population beforehand. So when the revolution does happen, as it did in Bangladesh, they're perfectly happy settling for a liberal, secular, quote unquote, democratic regime that is once again caught within the liberal capitalist system, and isn't able to break free from that. That's going to go down the same path. You're not going to be able to change a population or change a country just by changing the regime. You have to change the ideas of the people. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't change the state of a people until they change what is within themselves. So if I'm going to fight against, let's say, as a part of class struggle to overthrow the rich, right? Then fine, that's what you're doing, that's your aim. But don't be surprised when that leads to a whole bunch of other problems in society. So the point here, I guess, I don't want to go on too long for this. But the main sort of takeaway for me, really the main lesson from the Arab Spring, is to say that yes, we have this great mobilizing capacity, but what do we do, after that capacity? Or let's put it this way: after that capacity is realized, what do we do? Are we able to? What is the main reason that we're unable to sort of establish a coherent, stable political system with morals that is independent of foreign forces, etc.? It's because we don't have that. No, you go to school, they teach you secularism.
Hmm.
Yeah, you see secularism. Your struggle is purely from a dunyawi perspective, and you don't have Islamic values, you don't have akhlaq, you don't have knowledge, you don't have education, you don't have tarbiyah required to establish a governing system, whether that governing system is within your household, or it's in your community, or it's the entire state. I don't know if that made sense, but
No, Jazakallah khair. And to be honest, I think it's a scary concept, slightly a scary concept when you're reflecting back on it, because as you're saying, sometimes we sacrifice so much, we mobilize, the communities, the nations, we've put so much effort into this, and we may settle for something that's going to lead us into the same position again. And we've seen this, right? When we thought that changing the regime or the face of the regime will ultimately resolve the situation. And I think it's naive thinking, and it's led us to the same spot, right? With short-sighted thinking. And again, like we're seeing a similar situation unfold today in Bangladesh, as you mentioned, right?
yeah.
So a lot of that work needs to start much earlier on, right? Changing the ideas of the people, and that's ultimately going to change the concepts that they carry, and how they interact with society, and the thoughts that they carry and move forward within the ummah. What can we do? As people that see the solution, that understand the solution, that know that we need to completely replace the system with an Islamic system.
Okay,
Because
just
because
when you mentioned
sometimes it
Bangladesh,
feels, yeah, go ahead.
no, when you mentioned, go, no, you go first.
I was just saying that sometimes it feels that, you're kind of working against the tide, right? Even though you have the Islamic solution in mind, because you feel that, you may be outnumbered. You have millions of people that are wanting change. They're good people. They want the Ummah to be in a better state, but thinking about an Islamic state, thinking about ruling by the Sharia still feels so far out, right?
Absolutely, even though it isn't. Right? That's what
Correct.
Afghanistan
Yeah.
did. They said, "Look, we're a Muslim country. We implement Muslim values. Right? A Christian country might implement Christian values. Liberal country might implement liberal values. The type of country that we implement based on our understanding of reality and justice is none of your business. That's all we have to say. But anyway, that's beyond the point. That's in terms of global rhetoric. Back to your point about Bangladesh. I want to start here. Do you guys know how the revolution started, with what group of people, or what? I gave it away in the question.
Yeah, you gave it away in your question.
It was
University students.
politics.
University
So the
students, yeah.
students, they were mistreated, or they objected to a policy that was giving quota to basically a certain group of people. In other words, people weren't being selected for positions based on merit. Right? It was based on, on objective factors, and that led to student protests with student politics. The student wings in the universities, each party has like a little student wing. It's kind of like, you have your MSAs or your ISOCs in the West, but they're much stronger and larger in number. And so they're the ones who got together, and that sort of triggered the anti-regime movement. Now, the thing about this is, you go back to it, or you look at it now, you look at it after the revolution, and you go to those student leaders and you say, "Assalamu alaikum, akhi. So what are you guys going to do?" And that's what I did. There was, one brother, a friend of mine, who is a very successful person, mashallah. I don't want to, mention him, but he has his own, is a very large firm and stuff like that. And he was very much involved in the student politics aspect, and also in the post-revolution sort of, what is it called? System building or whatever. And we're just like, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And they're just like, "Oh yeah, we have some ideas or whatever." And they're like, "Okay, what are the ideas?" And the ideas, they go back to, "Oh, let's just, remove the corruption, kick out the corrupt people, remove Hasina's people, and then we can have democratic elections and continue the system." So I said, "Okay, that's not a solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is, number one, you have to have principles. If you're going to have a constitution, that's fine, but what are the principles of your constitution, right?" So, you're a Muslim country, you have an Islamic identity. You ask him, he says, "Yes, I do have an Islamic identity. I want Islamic values." But that for him, that's just a label. It's a slogan. Right? So I can put an Islamic flag in the background, but that has no value, because that's just words on a piece of paper. That has to be experienced by the heart. That has to be filled with knowledge. You have to actually read those books of fiqh. You see my
Mhm.
point? In order to be
Yeah.
able to implement them.
Yeah.
You don't know the fiqh of salah, and you want to implement khilafah. It doesn't work. Right? You have to go through that entire process. So back to the student politics, what can we do as individuals? You can say, "Oh, we're just, I'm just a student. I can't do anything. Uh, you know, what is it called? I don't have decision-making capacity in society." And this is all, these are all excuses or waswas of the shaitan to remove people from realizing their potential. Once again, it's about realizing your potential. It was the students in Bangladesh who created the change. Why can't
Mhm.
students other places in the world do that? More importantly, you go back to the time when people are students, and you say, "Wait a second, those students who did the revolution in Bangladesh are unable to do anything Islamic because they don't know what Islam is." Then you realize, wait a second, we have a greater problem. The greater problem isn't that people are unwilling to implement Islam, or that they don't believe that it's the best system. They don't know what it is. They think that being Muslim means having a La ilaha illallah flag, and, having maybe some nice big guns, and walking around in the street saying that you're Muslim. Why? Because certain groups, due to their nonsensical propaganda, and of course, which the Western media ate up, right,
Mhm.
and absolutely loved
Yeah.
and adored. That was the image of what it means to be a Muslim who implements Islam. And so we're left with that. So we have to now go back and build it up from scratch and say, "Look, this is aqidah, this is fiqh, here's how you pray, here's how you put your hands together, here's how you do wudu." And then, I think that involves a revival of the classical tradition. It involves genuine conversations with people, and that has to come together with political action. These two things cannot be isolated from one another.
And if I can touch on another point on this topic, maybe not answering your question directly, but just kind of a thought I was having as we were talking about this. Yani, the Prophet ﷺ, of course, tells us that Ulama warathatul anbiya, that the scholars are like the inheritors of the prophets. And maybe this is a good segue into the recent fatwas. But the point that Dr. Jan Islam is hitting on is really something that is missing in for being very, very direct with this from the scholarly class of the Muslim community. If the scholarly class of the Muslim community taught the deen in this manner that Dr. John is speaking about making the deen applicable to all levels of society, whether that's your typical quote unquote religious parts of Salah, etc., and then also with the politics part. So that perspective needs to be there from the scholarly class so that it trickles down to the people who are, like he was explaining, students who are looking for change, who are sincere in wanting change, who are sincere in seeing the uncomfortable environment they're in and seeing that they need change. But just like you spoke about, after that change opportunity is given to them, they don't know how to apply that change from an Islamic perspective. And maybe this is a good subject for the recent fatwas, but yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا. All you who believe, اتقوا الله, have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وقولوا قولا سديدا. Like speak the truth very clearly. Draw the straight line next to all the crooked lines. Which is why, looking at, the recent fatwas, I'm not surprised of the reality that, is being depicted here, which is because like look at just the generalization, and of course these are fatwas that alhamdulillah are going in the right direction, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give thabat and istiqamah to all the scholars who speak the truth and to make this like on their scales heavy inshallah. But quite frankly, there needs to be more accuracy and more precision in these fatwas, right? Because if you look at this perspective, the fruit seller on the side of the street, the one who is just barely making ends meet, etc. This person, when he hears that jihad's an obligation on me, and this is something that is an obligation on every single individual Muslim who is capable, etc. This is something we've known for many, many years. But the question is that who is the one who is capable in reality, looking at Ardul Waqi', looking at the actual reality in front of us, who is the one who's capable of taking that military intervention that we're looking for, that the scholars are looking for, that the Muslim Ummah is looking for? And those are the Muslim armies. So if the call is directed very, very clearly, and of course this needs to be from day one, not like taking this like 2 years almost of time to say this, but it needs to be very, very direct in speaking to the military class of society and saying you guys are the ones who have the preparation, you're the ones with the weapons, you're the one who are experienced in war.
Who
So
signed up for this job?
you signed up for this job, right? And not just that, but this is something you'll be questioned about in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إن رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه. يعني Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he conditions moving down from the level of changing the munkar with your hand to your tongue by istita'a. If you lack the istita'a, if you lack the capability, then you move on to changing it with your tongue. But the person who has the ability to change it with his hand, then this is incumbent upon him. So just to summarize what I'm trying to say, if the call from the scholarly class of the Ummah is very direct, if it's sadid, if it's direct, precise, and accurate when it comes to this issue of the military intervention being a fard shari, and something that we need to call the Muslim armies to, but also in general speaking about the deen as not this secularized deen, but this deen that came, to prevail over all other ways of mankind, and speaking about it in this way, where it is actually a deen that also speaks about politics. And this is something Prophet ﷺ, he speaks about. He says, كانت بنو إسرائيل تسوسهم الأنبياء وأنه لا نبي بعدي. Right? These are hadith we don't hear very often. The Prophet ﷺ mentions that Bani Israel, they used to have prophets as politicians, essentially, over them. And there is no prophet after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So speaking about these issues of the deen and making these things very clear and precise and accurately, showing the people not just the reality in front of us, but also the path forward. That's something that is like the cure to the issues that Dr. John is speaking about right now.
Yeah. So Jazakallah khair, Muhammad. I think there's a couple interesting points to unpack, and I'll lean towards you, Dr. Jaan. I know you recently, did a great episode with Brother Paul on Blogging Theology about
So
Islam
very
and the
nice.
nation state, right? And so my question kind of like leads with Muhammad's points about the mobilization of the Muslim masses and the people that have the capability, right? And the ones who these recent fatwas apply to. Do you see these type of actions taking place within the nation state concept that the Ummah is currently divided in today? Or do you see that the Ummah has to escape from this colonial world order that has lived in for the last 100 years or so to be able to take action, proper action for Gaza. And my second question, I'll get to my second question after. I'll let you answer this first.
Well, okay, first off, I'm gonna first thing about the fatwa, right? That was made urging those with the capability, rulers of Muslim countries and the militaries, etc., to declare defensive jihad and intervene in the genocide that is taking place in Gaza before our eyes. This is really, I think, although this is definitely a positive step and something that uh, uh, should be applauded, the those aspects of the fatwa that are not mentioned, or the unspoken parts, perhaps say even more about the reality of our ummah. The first one is,
Yeah.
and this goes
A
back
very
to
good
Brother
point.
Muhammad's, and I'm going to mention what those are, but this goes back to Brother Muhammad's point about the ulama and their role as the custodians of the ummah, and the inheritors of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that he feared uh, that besides the Dajjal, the greatest fitna that he feared for the Ummah is al-a'imma al-mudillun, the Imams who misguide. And what do? They sit in the gates of Jannah and they call towards Jahannam. So because he has a mashallah, he has a beard and he has a turban and he has a PhD from Al-Azhar, you say, wow, he's such a great scholar, and he misguides you. Whereas if he told you, you know what, I'm a tool of the shaitan, or I'm supported by the Israeli government, then you wouldn't listen to him in the first place. So this is the difficulty and the problem with these so-called scholars. You can call them palace scholars, as the Salaf and Ulama in the past used to call them. And the issue here, like, I'm not saying these are included amongst them, but my point is, you're calling for jihad, you're calling for an action that, forget about whether these nation states ever did that in the past. They don't implement any of the rulings of Islam. They don't do anything. Maybe they
Right.
don't even pray. They don't even pray their 5 salawat, and you want them to do jihad. That's not going to happen. And so the problem here is we don't have, and I'm not saying this, look, I'm not saying that we should focus on your spirituality and on your salah and on your khushu, and then magically the world's problems are going to be solved. That's also wrong. But the point here is it's not squarely only the ulama's fault, but the problem here is, where were these ulama, or where were any of the ulama in the beginning when this genocide first started? Where were these ulama before the genocide happened? There was occupation for 80 years. Where were these ulama when the US invaded Iraq and Afghanistan? How come those calls weren't being made? And the reason those calls weren't being made, at least on the level that they are today, is one reason. You know what that is? It's politics, political feasibility, political pragmatism. Because if you say something, okay, I might go to jail, I might be this, I might that, and you get scared and you don't talk. And that is exactly what destroys the deen. And that's why the Prophet said he feared the imams who called to to the gates of Jahannam. The reason they don't call because they're bad. They don't call because they're possessed by shaitan. They don't even call because they have money in their bank account. Some of them don't. Right? Some of them live poor. It's because they're scared. And when you're scared, you can say things that are good, that don't interfere with political authority, but you stay away from those things that do interfere with the political authority. And the result is no one knows about those obligations which are public and which apply outside of the personal realm. And they think that the deen is only applied to the personal realm. So my problem here is that, and I'm not being pessimistic, I'm saying from a practical perspective, we have to understand that in terms of public Muslim discourse, public discourse is important, right? As you said, whoever cannot
Absolutely.
change it with your tongue. If public discourse is effective, we have to say more than mobilize armies. We have to say there has to be fundamental change. And this goes back to what is the problem? The problem is we have a nation state system. We have a problem where identity is made on the basis of the physical place you were born, not the deen that you follow or the values that you have. We have a system which is completely dependent on the global capitalist system. And I'll tell you something I have personal knowledge about. There are some countries, some Muslim countries, that are not intervening in Gaza. Do you know why? Because they buy parts, they buy military equipment, which you can only get from Israel. And
No
their
way.
reasoning is, yes,
Subhanallah.
Yeah.
let's say there's a little piece of a microchip. You can't get it anywhere in the world. They get it from Israel. And so that guy says, if I forget about the costs of America invading me and all this, the weapon that I'm going to use, right, to intervene in Gaza was partially made by Israel, or we purchased the piece from Israel. And why is that? Because they are what is it called? Ingrained within the capitalist system. And so when you're in the capitalist system, you're dependent on those supply flows, and that basically causes complete at least from a dunyawi perspective, it causes complete immobilization. You're not able to do anything outside the permission of that status quo. So our problem, yes, it's an individual problem. It's about individual deen, individual religiosity. It's about lack of knowledge. It's about lack of but also as a political problem, it's more than just mobilizing the armies. It's more than that. It has to be. We have to think, systematically
Mm.
and re-theorize. In other words, when the ulama, and this is something the ulama really need to be doing, when they go back to the when they speak with the politicians or what they do, let's say you have someone who's brave enough to do that, they need to be comprehensive in their approach. They have to talk about implementing the rulings of Islam. They have to speak about
Absolutely.
political, economic independence, which leads to military independence, and more importantly, the cooperation between Muslim countries. In fact, eventually the abolition of the notion of a country altogether. I don't know if that's too
That-
radical.
we'll let the viewers and the commentators decide. So, the example that you gave of certain nation states being so deeply involved, in the capitalist world order that because of certain microchips, they're not able to move. That to me is very scary. It reminds me, I know it's not exactly the same, but it reminds me of previous nations like Ad and Thamud and the people of Nuh alayhi salam and Lut alayhi salam, people that just, completely took Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of the equation. People that thought they were so powerful that they could do whatever they want. They can decide what is right and wrong for themselves. They can dictate their own way of living and completely ignore Allah. And we saw the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed them. And I'm saying that this is not just the reality for non-Muslims, but even certain Muslims, right? So-called Muslims, that they are so deeply involved in the dunya that they're willing to see the slaughter of over 70,000 people in Gaza, if not way more, right? Children, mothers, people, with their limbs completely torn off, and continue to see this live, right? In today's day and age, we're seeing this every single day on social media, video recorded. And like you're saying, for the sake of microchips, for the sake of their capitalist economy, that is very scary to me.
And can I just add something, Akhi, if that's all right? Because I think it's very important to say this. Uh, these when you talk to pragmatists, they'll tell you that, look, if I'm reliant on the West for military technology, then I can't go to war with them. I need to accept what's happening until I'm able to gain my technological independence. Therefore, I'm going to do it. The benefits outweigh the costs. Whereas if I were to go to war now, we're going to lose that war, so there's no point doing it anyway. And when you say that, this is kind of thinking is completely wrong. It's against the basic ahkam of fiqh. It's against the prophetic spirituality and the message of Islam. It's against everything, right, that a person should believe in. They tell you, what do they tell you? They say, oh, you're being emotional. And the reality is that, Allah musta'an, I think just from a military warfare perspective, this is something I want to mention. All of those, when war really happens in reality, all of those conventional ideas about what warfare is and who wins and why they win and who has a bigger budget and who has more guns and who has fancier weapons, that completely gets destroyed. All of that gets shattered in reality. And I'll give you a perfect example. That's Russia. I'll give you one in the Muslim world, one in the non-Muslim world. Russia had great military technology, hypersonic rockets that couldn't even be intercepted by American Patriot systems. Right, amazing technological innovations. They're at the top of the world. They're competing with the United States, and they haven't been able to. They're moving like 10 square kilometers per day, and sacrificing 1,000 soldiers a day. Why? Because they realize, wait a second, high expensive technology is very, very expensive, and you can't sustain that over a period of 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. Even the U.S. can't. I was just reading I teach American foreign policy. I was reading the other day an article about the American military analyst. He was basically saying that the U.S. is completely screwing itself over by spending so much money on technology, which in the reality of war is not really going to help them. Why? Because they spend, let's say, $800 million on a single plane, right? And they only buy 20 bombs. I'm just giving you an example. They buy 20 bombs for for hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's very short term. You have a technological advantage. But in the long term, and this is exactly what he said, and this is a reality we see on the ground, when things happen in reality, it's not symmetric warfare. It's asymmetric warfare. It's unconventional warfare. And what happens is right now in Ukraine, they're not even using wireless technology. I was joking about the fact that I'm using a cord for to implement quality, right, for this talk. They're using drones with physical cords, with fiber cords. Why? Because the wireless ones can be detected and shot down, or they can be hacked. We're reverting back to technology. We're getting simpler technology. Ukraine is producing 200,000 drones a month just in the normal everyday households of people. You go there, you get a little kit, you put it together, and you send it. Very low technology. Maybe we had this technology 20, 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The point here is this notion that this is also an emotional response, and we're completely reliant on the West, and we're going to completely be destroyed if we do this. It's very largely psychological, and it also comes from ignorance of the dunya. Because as you said, brother, I forget who said it. The when you're immersed in the dunya, you think that the rules of the dunya are the only things that matters. Whereas when you read the Quran, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said what? He said, فَقْصُصِ الْقَصَص, that tell the stories, tell the accounts to the people so that they can remember and they can realize the reality of the situation that they're in. Every single time. Why do we have قوم عاد and Thamud and أصحاب Ibrahim and قوم Lut and Fir'aun and Musa? All these stories are repeated again and again and again and again, and you're just like, what's the point of repeating it so many times? Then what the true believer is going to realize that, wait a second, there's a reality behind that, which is that number one, the entire dunya is temporary to begin with. Number two, if the help of Allah comes, no one's going to stop it. And number three, this is what happens every single time, right? It's like you're playing a game, and a little kid takes it seriously, and you play the same thing again. He takes it seriously again. He never learns because he's a kid. But we're adults, and we still think we're living the same simulation that we were, many times in the past, in terms of Muslims versus the oppressors, and the oppressors tried to destroy the Muslims. And the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, for instance, they could have destroyed him on many occasions. They attempted to assassinate him. They tried to boycott the Muslims and turn them away from Islam. And when the boycott was happening, it was the Meccans themselves who rebelled against the boycott. Why? Because they said, look, these are our people. They didn't do anything wrong. They're not bad people. I know them. They're my friends. They're my relatives. And we're starving them to death. I don't believe in that. So that turned back on their own selves, within their system. So if Allah is capable of destroying them within their own system, which is exactly what we see with capitalism, look at what Trump is doing. He's reverting the capitalist order because he realized that there are so many contradictions and so many problems. If we don't change them, it's going to get worse. The sad story for him is, regardless of what he does, it's going to get worse because we're entering a multipolar world. Bottom line, dear brothers, bottom line is, uh, as long as you are within the ahkam of the divine law, and as long as you have you're purifying yourself spiritually, you're working to improve your communities, you have a personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you genuinely want to change for his sake, anyone who sacrifices the dunya for that sake will be rewarded either in the dunya or the akhirah, or both. But as an individual, he might not get in the dunya, he will get in the akhirah, but as a community, they will be successful in this dunya. This is very important. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that he inherits the earth. Who does he inherit? Who does Allah make inherit the earth in the Quran? عبادي الصالحون, the righteous slaves of Allah, my righteous slaves. So many times in the Quran. So this is, inshallah, these lessons of the past can help us position our understand the reality.
I was just going to mention two other things that came to my mind, right? You gave the example of the Russian war that they're currently experiencing. And then you look at historically, you look at Afghanistan, right? The
I was going to give that example. I totally forgot. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Yes, please.
yeah, yeah. It's basically the land that could never get invaded or conquered, and they were never, in a state where they were, technologically advanced. They had just pure, will, determination, backed by iman, and so on and so forth, and continue to resist, for the sake of Islam. And then we look at, even historically, the time of the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How many times were they outnumbered? Many, many times, right? They didn't have the same technological advancements as the Quraysh did, or the numbers that the Quraysh did, or the Romans, or the Persians, right? But it was, if you look at the Sahaba, they were living for the akhirah, right? They weren't limited to this dunya. Their thinking was not limited to this dunya. They had a vision beyond, the 60, 70 years that they were in this dunya for. They understood that this dunya is a prison for the believers, right? And they're living for the akhirah. And that's what allowed them to just believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, take the commandments that Allah is saying, follow the footsteps of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and continue to march forward even when the reality in front of you doesn't make sense. Right? That's what made them so special and so different.
David and Goliath, right? Dawood
Exactly.
and Jalut. Okay, and those with weak in iman, they said, how can we defeat Jalut and his soldiers? They're so big and they're so strong and they're so numerous. And what was the response of the believers? That was way back then. كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله. That was back then. There were so many examples of the small party defeating the large party. Imagine our
Now
time.
we have even more.
SubhanAllah. Muhammad, any more points on this? Or
I was gonna mention exactly what you just mentioned right now, the ayah. But other than that, one other thought that came to mind, yeah, subhanAllah, it's kind of like a like a dichotomy that we see today, unfortunately. But like we mentioned before, speaking about how like people take this issue of tazkiyah or spirituality, nafsiyah, to be so far that, oh, if you just focus on yourself and your tazkiyah, your nafs, etc., then eventually this will just fix the community and just magically, right? If you pause on that idea for a second and you take that person in context of the conversation we're having right now, you'll find that this person who claims to be focused on tazkiyah and tazkiyah to nafs, etc., he's the one who's talking about how the Muslims, it's just not possible. There's no way they're going to defeat Israel. Just to look at, all the previous wars that have occurred. There's no way to defeat this army, etc., etc., etc. And this is in a post, and this is what's shocking. This is in a post October 7th world. Imagine, where in front of your eyes, it's been proven, right? That this isn't, some army that's absolutely unconquerable and cannot be defeated, etc. Like the spider web has been shown for what it is, right? It's a house of spiders. And how does it connect to the lack of tazkiyah in reality? It's because if that person truly, and this is what true tazkiyah is, truly understood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rizq is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ajal is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ, that those are the days that we flip between people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ultimately the one who decides when the victory comes and who He will give victory to on a certain day. So all this is aqidah. All purifying these concepts, that itself is tazkiyah, right? Because the nafs might tell you that there's no way, our preparation militarily is not equal to their preparation. And even from that perspective, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is blessed the ummah with so much that even from that perspective, you can sit down and you can go through the numbers. Like I was sitting the other day with someone who's more knowledgeable on this topic and going through this exact issue of going through, each country in the Muslim world, the amount of soldiers they have, the technology they have, the military might that they have, right? And subhanAllah, it was because one of the brothers, he was saying that, you know, uh, Israel, with its technological advancement, it's just too militarily advanced, and one of their tanks can take out 1,000 tanks, from the Muslim. And no, this is a genuine like concept that he held. You know what I mean? Obviously, of course,
Sorry, they couldn't take
you know,
Gaza in 1.5 years. They couldn't defeat
subhanallah,
10,000 soldiers.
subhanallah, and these are guerrilla
300,000
warfare
soldiers
tactics.
couldn't defeat 10,000. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, actually, on that point, not even that. Some people don't even realize the sheer small number of soldiers that are in, like, look at Janine. We just mentioned this. Look at Janine. Janine. Some people think that the Khatib and Janine, the brigade and Janine are huge. There's like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. The actual number, like I was with your chef the other day, it was 100 to 300. That's it. SubhanAllah, that's it. And there's stories of like one mujahid, standing up to a whole brigade of Yahud. And then, of course, this is the Sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's put in their hearts ru'b. Yani, this is like a fact. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by Nasr al-Quran, like by the text of the Quran, He's explained this to us that, they fear you more than they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The point of all this to say is that, like, these ideas, although, we haven't been conditioned to understand this, we've been conditioned to think the opposite, but this itself is tazkiyah. This is purifying your aqidah from false, corrupt concepts that, this dunya is the only measurement of, victory and defeat, of strength and weakness, etc. As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the one who created in them the ability to even breathe. Imagine that for a second. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can decide the same way He sent angels. And by the way, this is another tangent, but in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentioned in the Quran how He sent these angels, to the Muslims to support them in the thousands, right? But He mentions Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this is, He sent it only as a bushra, وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ بِهِ قُلُوبُكُم, right? وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that, even all these angels, like imagine, look at how the aqidah lesson Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching us in the Quran, the tazkiyah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us in the Quran, that even after sending all these angels, thousands, imagine if angels came right now in a Muslim sada with their eyes themselves, right? They would think that yes, now victory can come. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you the opposite. He's saying we sent you the angels only as a bushra, only as a glad tiding, so that your hearts feel tranquility in sakina, and you feel طمأنينة, right? And then right after, in the same ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions وَمَا النَّصْرُ إِلَّا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. And victory can only come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's the significance of mentioning, the angels and their glad tiding, and it's been sent for you to give you tranquility, etc. And then mentioning that victory only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The reason is so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding you that even with these angels, this is just for you to for humans to feel that direct sense that yes, the victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has come. When in reality, it's not the angels that give you victory. It's not your huge numbers that gives you victory. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that itself
Yeah.
is tazkiyah. So subhanAllah,
The
just
thing
the thought
about
that came to mind.
Tazkiyah and Tasawwuf, if you ask the Sufis back in the day, I don't mean the modern day palace scholar Sufis, in the real Sufis back in the day, and you say, for instance, in the Ottoman Empire, from the time of the Salaf all the way to the Ottoman Empire, the fundamental notion was that jihad and ordering good, these two qualities, are a part of your tazkiyah. Very quickly, you would have Sufi fuqara who would go around town to town and just worship Allah. People think that these guys were apolitical. This is not true. And each of those towns, they'd go from town to town to town. Each time they would become famous, they would leave the town because they don't want to be famous. They didn't want the credit to be given to them, right? Because they want to protect their sincerity. And you might be saying, okay, wait a second. Why is this guy famous? Is he famous because he prays in the mosque? No, he's not. He's famous because the second you go into a city, you go into a town, the second you go there, you see all kinds of wrong things that are happening. You see all the rulers are doing bad things, all the judges are corrupt, etc., etc. What do? You speak the truth, which is your obligation. Immediately, you're on the front page of the news. And then the guy becomes famous. He's a faqir and he worships Allah and he's a good guy and he speaks the truth. Oh my God. Then he says, okay, I have to leave here. There he goes. Then you have the image of the Ghazi. The Ghazi was and this is all the way until really the 20th century. The notion that you had the warrior who spreads the deen of Allah through participation in in jihad fi sabilillah. That's the goal of it. The goal is da'wah. The goal is implementing the deen. The goal is, and in doing so, you have to undertake major personal sacrifices. You sacrifice your life, your wealth, put yourself in danger. From the time of the Salaf all the way to the Sufi Ghazi time, this was very much active. It was in Chechnya, for instance, when they're fighting against the Russians. It was in the Ottoman Empire when they're fighting against the colonial powers. And now you ask yourself, wait a second. Ask, let's say, the average Sufi you're talking about. Who, some of them they like to make comments about Syria, right? They like to talk about Syria and how they
Yeah.
don't support the Mujahideen, and they don't. Oh, well, I don't support Assad. I also don't support the Mujahideen. It's like, what happened to you, Akhi? Subhanallah. You think for your definition of tazkiyah is jumping up and down and making dhikr, or your definition of tazkiyah? Well, I'm serious. Like, is that tazkiyah for you? No, that's the trick of the shaitan, that you think that this is you're purifying yourself. What are you purifying yourself for if you have no social value whatsoever? Right? And this is the reality. Look at the time of the Sahaba. Were they? How did Allah purify them? How did they become purified such that Allah made them individually leaders They were nations in and of themselves. How did they reach that level? Well, they reached it through struggle. They reached it through starvation. They reached it through jihad. They reached it through solving social problems, right? They reached it through, implementing the knowledge that they had in a social capacity. And this goes back again. So now you can say, okay, in terms of practical prescriptions, we have to realize that Amr al-Ma'ruf is a part of that. The Prophet ﷺ said that, I guess to summarize a hadith, I don't remember the exact wording, that if there is an evil and the ummah does not, or the community does not speak up against that evil, they do not, order good and prohibit evil, then Allah will encompass all of them in adab. Allah will encompass all of them in punishment, like the Ashab al-Sabt from the Bani Israel. Similarly, Prophet ﷺ said that if you do aina transactions, it's like a loophole for interest. You do aina transactions and you follow the tails of cattle and you are pleased with agriculture, talking about, you love this dunya and trade and agriculture and that kind of thing. وَتَرَكْتُمُ الْجِهَادِ, and you left jihad, then Allah will establish humiliation over you and He will not remove it until you return to your deen.
Mhm.
These are really, really, they're not just hadith that we quote. They're not just talking points. They're not slogans. These are things that most of the people, unfortunately, most of the people have not. Just like when you talk about the obligation of salah, you can be talking to a guy about, talk to some brothers sometimes here. You talk to them about Islam and Islamic identity, like, yeah, mashallah, that's great. And then it's time for salah, and you say, let's go, bismillah. And the guy is like, akhi, you go pray, I'll just make dua that I can establish a salah. You don't have that in the West, by the way. This is something that you find more in Muslim countries.
Interesting. Turkey
Right.
more?
Yeah, interesting.
But so we have a crisis of not acting upon that knowledge, including the people. So if the people of Tazkiyah and Tasawwuf don't act upon the knowledge that they learn or that they know, then who are we left with? That's the question that we should be asking.
SubhanAllah. This is very good examples by you both. It's been a really good conversation. I have one final point and then we can close this recording after this. Um, you know, when I look at the genocide that's being committed and I compare it to the Arab Spring, right? We looked at like you said, the economic conditions and the hardship that was placed upon the people that allowed the Tunisian fruit seller to burn himself, and that triggered, an onslaught of massive, protests and so on and so forth. I look at Gaza today, and I think about what more does the Ummah need to see to really truly erupt to that level, to remove these regimes, to dissolve the borders, right? There's a beautiful video that came out from the Bangladeshi protests. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it was a person who was speaking in Arabic, and he was telling the Muslim armies their obligation and the Muslim rulers their obligation. And he said at the end that if you don't have the capability or the will, or if you're fearful of the West, open the borders for us, and we will go ourselves, right? And I look at all of this together and think, what more do you need to see? Part of me tells me that, and I hear some of these people from some of these thoughts from my Egyptian friends. I have a huge Egyptian community around me, and they tell me that they have rebuilt Egypt in such a way that you can't even protest in the same manner that you could in the past, right? So have the regimes just gotten better? Has the West gone? Have the enemies gotten better? Or have we now truly realized our potential? What the Ummah really needs to, the viewers, the Ummah today, the young people, the college students, the young professionals, what do you walk away with? What kind of actions can you start taking? What more needs to happen for this ummah to unite and get rid of these atrocities that the ummah is suffering from?
Akhi, you asked such a great question. I don't know if I can answer it in such a short time, but I can give you all the talking points. I can say that we have to do order good and forbid evil, and we have to purify ourselves, and we have to learn and become, learn the deen traditionally as it was revealed. We have to improve our relationship with the Quran. I can give you all the answers, right? We have to understand and learn society and politics, and how the fuqaha have conceived of implementing them in our current reality. But instead of getting into all those details, I think with the time in mind, and just to keep this succinct, the most important thing, or the best piece of advice that I can give everyone, inshallah, is all of these things that you're going to learn, all of the actions you're going to take to reform yourself, all of the knowledge that you're going to get. You can read hundreds of volumes and get the knowledge from all of that. All of it is going to start with taking one sincere step, with deciding to reform your life for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to give what Allah has given you, whether it's knowledge, whether it's hands and legs, whether it's money, whether it's education, for the sake of Allah, for the sake of Islam, and to do that in line with the revelation and with the Quran and with the fiqh that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed you with, and to undertake the knowledge or the seeking of knowledge in order to learn those obligations in the first place. All of that starts off with one sincere step that you have to take consciously in order to reform your life and yourself, and then after that, the rest of society. So I guess the bottom line here, dear brothers and sisters, is that the project to reform the Ummah and to reform the world and to bring justice to the world, it has to start with yourself. If we spend 4 years in our university degree and thousands of hours to get a degree and a master's and a PhD and mashallah and work experience for years and thousands of hours for the dunya, we can't sit for 10 minutes to learn the deen in a serious way, every week or every day, then that's where we have to start. If we don't consider it a priority, if we're just going to be passive observers, I'm going to watch podcasts, you're not going to change the ummah by watching podcasts, right? Sorry to go against your marketing. I'm just kidding. I know this is the real intention behind your podcast is to wake people up and say that we have to do something with our life. If I tell you that your job is to become a big doctor and win the world prize, or if I said, or the Nobel Prize, or if I said that your goal is to have $1 billion net worth, you're going to say, yeah, I'm going to take my life seriously. I'm going to take a financial literacy class. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then, over a process of 20 to 30 years, I'm going to develop myself in order to be in a position where I can, be of influence and implement the deen to whatever extent I'm able to. Uh, that's what we have to do. But thinking in terms of our akhirah, thinking in terms of our relationship with Allah.
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Goals and purposes driven by Islam. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Jaan. I know you have to get going. So really appreciate this episode, sharing your experiences and the different advices that you have given. Jazakallah khair, Brother Muhammad.
I think
I really appreciate the invitation, and I want to thank you for this great opportunity. And I hope that, Allah forgives me for any shortcomings or any mistakes I've made, and that, Allah puts barakah in all of our discussions and all of our da'wah.
Jazakallah khair. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakumullah khairan, guys, for tuning in onto this beautiful episode. Inshallah, we'll have more of Dr. Jaan, share more experiences, more of his political analysis, as well as the Islamic solutions. I encourage you all to share this video with your friends and families, and continue to do the work that you can on an individual basis, on a collective basis. Do what you can for the sake of this ummah, to revive this ummah, because not just the fact that the ummah needs every single person participating in its revival, but you will need this on the day of judgment in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.